I've had a few people now ask me how the system works, so I'll try and do a video on how I've got it set up and how everything works on it. We've got the intake, which I've got the filter mounted inside the wing to try and reduce the amount of hot air that it draws in. Runs up into the turbo as normal and out down the front through the intercooler as you would a normal system. So it's 76mm piping all the way through, and then I've got a 50mm pipe spurs off as the normal intercooler piping bends and comes up. There's also a pipe that goes straight on and comes up the inside, underneath, sorry, of the supercharger there. Through the supercharger, out the top, round, and joins back on here. I'm not happy with how tight this bend is, but short of coming all the way out and doing a massive sweep, it was kind of the best with the space I'd got, but it seems to work alright, so I'm happy with it. Now, this is a throttle body off of Toyota engine 2GR. It's the electronic throttle body off of it, which acts as the bypass valve. So when the supercharger is engaged, which it's on a clutched pulley, so the supercharger will engage, this valve will close, and then it blocks off the air, so it's forced, it has to go through, down, up and through the supercharger. The way I did this was, because normally this will default to closed, and then wide open throttle will obviously open it fully. So I've opened all this up, turned it round, basically changed the mechanism inside so it works the other way around. It defaults to open, and then wide open throttle will make it closed. So that way, if there's ever anything goes wrong with the electrics, this will just default to open and it will run totally normally without breaking me down and stranding me somewhere. The blow-off valve is adjustable, so I've got that set. So if the throttle snaps shut, the ECU will disengage the supercharger at that point. This bypass valve will open, and any excess pressure in the system will just come off the blow-off valve like it normally would. The whole system operates off of the ECU under the Nitrous Output. It's an AEM V2 and I've got it set on the Nitrous Output. It was originally on the VTEC output, which just had a simple aside, it opening or closing or turning on and off at a set RPM, a set boost pressure, and a couple of other things, like it won't operate below 80 on the 80 degrees C on the water temperature, coolant temperature. But what I found I was getting was where it was reaching the boost pressure, and it would come up and the system would open, and of course you get a drop in boost, and it would register that and then close the system again, and then think, oh no, supercharger on, turn it on, bring it up to boost, and I was getting this fluctuation where it open close open close. So I've now got it running on nitrous, because that's got an off above and then it's got a reinstate below. So the reinstate is set much lower than what it shuts off at. It won't reactivate until it drops below I think it's 1 psi or something, so it'll ensure you don't get that on off fluttering that I got before, and it seems to work alright now. When it does change over, there's a small amount of drop in power that you can feel, but it's really minimal. It's no different to when you've got the standard twin setup and it goes from just being on the one to on both of them. It's just a slight drop and then up again. It's nothing really that makes a big difference, unless you're really going for ridiculous track numbers or drag numbers or anything, but that wasn't really the point of this, because I've run the whole system on a few different settings. I've got a kind of everyday driving, and it's only set to absolute max around 6 psi, which isn't huge, but it still happily makes 300 horsepower at that all day long, and it's really responsive with it. So then from there you can have it running without the supercharger and just in high boost on the turbo, which will run up at just under 14 psi. You can have it running with the supercharger and the turbocharger on high boost, or supercharger and turbocharger on low boost. Now this car's been through several different iterations. I've had the 7M in it as a turbo, I've had a 2JZ stock twin turbo, I've had that running with a boost valve to bring the boost up and run slightly higher, and an SAFC to try and trick the fueling. I then had that as a single turbo running the Borg-Warner SX300, which that is, and I've also had it running with fully forged internals and the Borg-Warner, and it was making just over 700 horsepower at that point. The problem was, after a trip to the dyno with it in that setup, and as I later found out, some very bad mapping, the engine overheated, it went up to 130 degrees, and the whole thing just decided to eat itself. It's hard to go back again and spend all that money on a forged engine, and the thing was, I didn't really enjoy driving it. It was laggy, it was heavy on the clutch, it was very bitey because the clutch had to be so high rated, and it just wasn't really any fun. I just wanted to get to where I was going, or have a big old boost session and get a grin off that, but that's about it. The rest of the time it was just a horrible car to drive. So after that I decided to just try running the standard 2JZ NA block, the GE block, with the thought that if it blows up it doesn't matter as much, I'll just throw a new one in. So this is 2JZ GE VVTi. It's still running the standard 10.5 compression. It's never been opened. The only thing I had to do on it was change the crank sensor wheel to the 12 tooth one because the AEM didn't like reading the 36. But other than that, it's completely standard. Standard head gasket, standard pistons, standard rods, and I'm sure some people will scream and shout at that, but I've been running 430 horsepower for 3.5 years now, quite happily, and it's given me no grief. And what I would say is, having the high compression on it, it's a much more responsive engine and it just feels nicer to drive. Add into the mix the turbo supercharger, and it just puts a grin on my face every time I go out in it. It would, in a race, it would absolutely do the old engine, because alright, the old one was making 700 plus horsepower, but that didn't come in until way after 5,000. It was about 5,200 RPM when that really started taking off. Whereas this thing, from 1,500 RPM, you're on boost, you're away. The torque curve on this, and I'll hopefully put a dyno sheet in, try and figure out how to put that into the video, but the torque curve is much more like a big naturally aspirated V8, where it just goes up from the beginning, stays high all the way along, and it pulls right through to the red line. One problem I did have initially as well was the belt slipping on the supercharger. So I had this, which is an S2000 pulley, from where I obviously got rid of the power steering and the aircon before. I run a electro-hydraulic power steering pump from I think it's a 2005 Vauxhall Astra, cost me £25, one of the best moves I've made. It's brilliant. It just feels absolutely normal on the steering, but it's just super reliable, minimal parts, no drag on the engine. So the problem I had here was the S2000 pulley was originally down here, and the belt just came across the top and down, but I just wasn't getting enough coverage on the pulley, so I did get a little bit of chatter, a little bit of slip every now and then. So I modified it, made this to fit up here, changed that to a smooth pulley, That's the old one off there, and now you can see where it goes. So we get full tension on there, and I get absolutely zero problems. And everything on here is my own work. I've done everything myself. The only thing that I haven't done was the welding, the alley welding. I haven't cracked that yet, but I will. That's the main part of the system, really. If you want to know some more boring stuff about it, I call it the Womble, because it's made up of a lot of different bits. The carbon fibre intake pipe here was actually the exhaust from a TVR Tuscan. The heat shield on the back of there was the leftover splashback from a kitchen I fitted many years ago. The heat shield for the turbo, which is one of my favourite mods, is actually a Tesco saucepan. I'll just cut the back off, cut the lip off the top, and it's that thing that whenever I show people, second you know what it is, you can tell what it is.